And now I request Honorary Secretary Ashil Sanghi to introduce both the guest speakers for that.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our past president, Harish Satyani, and his son, Satyani. A distinguished member, E.P. Harish Satyani,
Hey, how will I do this? You come here.
Part of our Rotary family. He has also served as the chairperson of the program committee.
Listen, you
Mr.
sit
Satyani is a senior advocate of the Bombay High Court for the past 31 years.
I need your
He
help.
started off his career as a criminal lawyer, but over time he has achieved the distinction of a versatile and broad-based practice across diverse areas of constitutional, commercial, and arbitration law. Outside of law, he stood up for many public causes and displayed immense courage by taking a stand, such as in the fight against the emergency that led to a foray into politics with the Janata Party. He also contested MLA elections as a candidate for the BJP. At a personal level, he is known for his charisma, quick wit, generosity to others, and a loving family man. And he is completely crazy about his grandchildren. Mr. Dekkan is someone who will not hesitate to call a spade a spade. In fact, when he took, he took help from the Meta AI to describe his post on Facebook, this is the response we got. He's famous on Facebook for his unfiltered thoughts that might just get him kicked off some frenzy. He's very informed about national and international current affairs, sports, largely from the point of view of getting good bets at the long odds. He is one of the Bombay's original rock and rollers, fronting two rock bands in the 60s, getting expelled from college twice, under the influence of the long hair fads, the stones in the region, and then for singing the provocative lyrics of Harry Belafonte. Man smart, woman smarter. Music is still very much in him, and it's passed on to the second and third generation, excluding his son Sharan. So I'm going to now introduce Sharan. For starters, this is probably the only presently practicing father-son duo who are both designated senior counsels of the Bombay High Court. Sharan is reputed as being one of the youngest to have achieved his position at the age of 42. He also had the honor to be invited as a law tenant for 39 Excess Chamber of England and Wales. After doing his law degree at the Government Law College, Sharan did his Masters in Law from Georgetown University and graduated as a class with distinction. Sharan was admitted to the New York Bar as an attorney at law and has worked with a large US firm and then the World Trade Organization in Geneva as a judicial clerk. He has been appointed as amicus curiae by the court to act as a neutral friend of the court on various critical issues. He specializes in civil, commercial litigation, constitutional litigation, and has close to 300 reported judgments in the Bombay High Court. He is also involved in several public interest litigations, for example in environment and international arbitration. Sharan was a board member of the Bombay International School for almost 4 years, giving him first-hand and close insight into the primary and secondary education at different facets. Sharan has a close affection for Asha Sadhan, a rescue home and orphanage of the Maharashtra State Women's Council. He goes there with his daughter for the annual day of Diwali functions organized by his sister. He is very passionate about football and music, and his unique is that he is the only Japanese that cannot actually sing. Despite the long hours and pressures of work, the center of his world has 2 daughters, and in his spare time is meant for them. He is highly involved father, and Sharan loves children. Although Sharan is not our Rotary member, his wife Ami Jatyani, who is a member and is taking active interest in the club. I'd like to now call upon Sharan to introduce the topic for today, the lighter side of law.
Let me start by saying what a singular honor it is for me to be addressing this particular Rotary Club because of the several years of association. And there's another thing which comes to mind when I was listening to the 2 introductions and I was thinking of the topic at hand. That when I heard the introduction of my father, the expulsions from college, the long hair, the rock music, the rock band, it clearly occurred to me that there's only one person who's authorized to speak on the lighter side of the law. When I heard my own introduction, it was completely devoid of any lightness whatsoever. And I asked myself why in my debut at the Rotary I'm addressing you on the lighter side of the law. But that said, let me say a few words before we begin what I think is going to be more of a conversation. I was 8 or 9 years old when my father joined the Rotary. I was 13 years old when he was the head of programs. And I was 23 years old when he was the past president. And for all of these years, Rotary was an absolutely integral and essential part of our lives. And then in the year 2000, he and by extension the family took somewhat of a semi-retirement from the Rotary till we came back with a vengeance when my wife Ami Jagtiani joined the Rotary about a year ago. Now in those Rotary years, those peak Rotary years, on Tuesday evenings, Tuesday nights, what transpired at the Rotary was a very common dinner table conversation. And the conversation generally revolved around the speaker. And if the speaker was a poor speaker, a dry speaker, or a boring speaker, my dad in his typical exaggerated ways would come home and tell us that the speaker was so bad that at the end of the Rotary meeting, people were taking money out of the sunshine box. We all know that he is prone only to a little exaggeration, but that was generally his way of describing a boring or a drab afternoon. And conversely, when the speaker was an entertaining speaker or an enlightening speaker, and as we know, good speakers have the ability and the capacity to both captivate and elevate, they were praised to high heavens. So I find myself today in my foray as a Rotary speaker being put to the test of what is everyone over here going to say to their families when they go home this evening. And the only comfort that I have, despite the pressure of whether you're going to be taking money out of or putting money into the sunshine box at the end of today's Rotary meeting, is that today I'm doing it as part of a jugalbandi with my father. And as with all jugalbandis, you sink and you swim together. So, a couple of disclaimers before we start. And the first is that this topic of the lighter side of the law, which means everything and nothing at the same time, was chosen by my father. I had little to do with it. And like most sons, my instinct was to feel that he chose wrong. And another, perhaps, view that I have on my father's decision-making generally is that when it's without consulting the family, it tends to be wrong. With the only exception being his decision to marry my mom. So, with this, if the afternoon falls into the category of taking money out of the sunshine box, he'll indemnify at least half of that. Now, when we look at the subject of the lighter side of the law, the challenge in coming up with anything meaningful to say is that whenever I interact with anyone, they only tell me about their darkest experiences with the law. Before I came in today, I spoke to a Rotarian who told me about the miserable time he spent in court and the long years and the lack of any fruitful result. And these are years which are spent sometimes with uncertainty and prohibitive costs, oftentimes driving a litigant to penury regardless of the outcome of the case. And what adds to or compounds this dismay about the law and about your interaction with lawyers is that oftentimes lawyers are compared with doctors because we are service providers and supposed to be noble professions. But when we speak of experiences with a doctor, we oftentimes come out of that experience with glowing praise. I'll give you an example, and it's an example which connects to the Rotary. I consulted Rotarian Dr. Sharat Bolwala some time ago. I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I went to his clinic and he looked at me and he said, "All Ravish, the prescription that I have for you is that you have to go and spend 3 days in Goa alone, and that too without your wife." And what makes it worse when lawyers are compared to doctors is that at the end of that, when I said, "What do I pay you, doc?" he said, "No, you don't charge. I'm not charging you anything because of the fraternity that we have." And so by contrast and by juxtaposition, lawyers are always seen, and the experience with lawyers is always seen in a bad light. Again, when we look at the process of litigation and the process of law, there is always going to be two sides to any story. The truth is never black and white, the truth is always grey. And a litigant who consults a lawyer expects to be told with some degree of certainty what the outcome is going to be, what the future is going to be. But any reasonable and sensible lawyer is bound to be guarded in his or her opinion because of the vagaries associated with the process of the law and with the manner in which it operates in each of our lives. So, with all of the stresses and strains that go with the practice of law, it's really hard to find what is really the lighter side of the law. Another part that I want to share as a matter of personal experience is that what again contributes to the stresses and strains of the practice of law is the extremely public environment in which we practice our trade. We don't have the luxury of sitting in a room where nobody is scrutinizing or nobody is observing us. Especially as litigators, your work is in a courtroom where oftentimes you are being viewed and scrutinized by 200 and 300 people at the same time. Your work is an open book. In fact, in one of my very early days as a counsel, my senior Mr. Dwarkadas told me that arguing in court is like being one of those acrobats, those tightrope walkers in a circus, where the people who are there in the courtroom are like those who go to the circus. Many of them are there to watch the act, but there are some who are also there to watch the acrobat fall. And it's with this kind of pressure that we have to function. That said, coming closer to the subject at hand of what is the lighter side of law and is there in fact a lighter side of the law. The last point that I want to share with you as an introduction is that in this high stress environment, one of the real attributes to advocacy when you are arguing a pressure matter or a matter which involves high stakes with significant outcomes is the ability to introduce wit, is the ability to make a light-hearted comment or crack a joke or say something that's going to reduce the pressure in the courtroom. And oftentimes that's an extremely effective tool of advocacy. It's in those moments that some of the giants of this profession have really made their name in their ability to connect with another human mind and engage another human mind at different levels. You can engage them intellectually, you can engage them in a more human way. And that's really what we're going to try and explore when we discuss and delve into the subject of the lighter side of the law. We've grown up on many tales and anecdotes of legends and incidents that have happened in court. That's part of legal folklore. I think the idea of today's conversation is not to repeat what is part of folklore, but to draw on my father's and my collective experience of almost about 80 years in the profession, collectively. Lion's sharing his, of course. And with those collective experiences, we're going to give you some anecdotes and incidences which I think will show the human drama and the human side of what the law is all about. Now, as they say when you hear this conversation and you're hearing these accounts, as they say, never let the truth come in the way of a good story. So, don't hold us to that standard. Don't ask us about details, but listen to it, and they're by and large quite accurate. So with that, I wanted to introduce the subject of what is the lighter side of the law and take it over with a conversation between me and my father. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Sharon, that was a wonderful perspective, but when I heard myself being talked about, I couldn't make up my mind if they were saying good things or defaming me. Anyway, I'll presume that they were good. All right.
So that let me begin this conversation by asking you in your many years at the bar about some of your formative and early experiences at the bar. And is there anything that comes to mind as an early experience, as an early exchange, which stayed with you through all these years and perhaps shaped your view of what is going to be your future in the law?
Well, when I started my profession, and I was a briefless lawyer, like most people are, unless you come from a family of lawyers otherwise. Youngster, you want to find a role model. So you basically go around and you're told so-and-so is a fantastic lawyer, go and sit in his court when he's arguing. So I was looking around, and as I left the library, I found a gentleman whom I didn't know, and he obviously didn't know me. So he stops me and says, "Young man, have you just joined the bar?" So I said, "Yes." His name was Mr. Mukhi. Come to that. So he says, "You know, young man, I'll give you 3 maxims to live by in this profession. And if you do, your life will be a breeze." And without waiting for me to ask what it was, he said, 1, remember, a judge will always be perverse. 2, your senior will always let you down. And 3, your client will never be satisfied. Now it sounded so utterly cynical that I said, well, okay, these 3 maxims I'm able to live by, life will certainly be a breeze. And so that's how I was initiated into the legal profession. Just incidentally, he went on to become a judge of the Bombay High Court, Justice Mukhi. And contrary gets said about judges being perverse. He was one of the most humane judges, totally in command, full of integrity. That was the sort of character that he was. Of course, there's another side story to that which I won't get into, but that's my early experience.
And another thing which is, I think, somewhat unique about your trajectory is that during your early days as a practicing lawyer, you were also a professor at the Government Law College. Now, one thing strikes me is that you must have taught a number of students who have then later gone on to become lawyers, and I think some of them judges. So, how does that relationship of professor and student impact what may otherwise later on be a relationship of you appearing in their court or as counsel opposing each other? Does one bear upon the other?
Well, I'll tell you that something amusing comes to mind. Now, of course, when you're teaching students, you don't know who's going to blossom and you don't know what their career paths would be. Now, this happened just about 7 or 8 or 9 years ago. I was arguing before Justice Sri Ram of the Bombay High Court. And we got into an issue. It was a question. I used to teach the Evidence Act for a while. So we had a bit of a disagreement and we joined issues on certain aspects of the Evidence Act. I tried to canvass a point of view. He said, no, he didn't agree with me. Then with a little twinkle, he says, Mr. Jagtiani, you know I am right. After all, it was you who taught me this subject. Now, I wasn't going to let him get the last laugh. So I said, my lord, in all these years since I've given up teaching, no one ever told me I was such a bad teacher. so this was it. Finally, he took it very, he tossed his head back and had a good laugh as well. So these are some of the things which really come your way.
And also, you have, unlike the manner in which I practice the law, which is to deal largely with law firms and solicitors and advocates, you have much more direct contact with clients because you have your own firm. And when you deal with lay people, or at least lay people to the law, how do you, with any particularly quirky episodes or incidences between you and clients, especially given that your sense of humor is not something that everyone will understand?
Well, we put it to test. So, early clients, certainly. Well, very early in my practice, I used to take lessons in Indian classical music. Rightly so, I didn't pursue it. And my Guruji once comes to me, about 3 or 4 years at the bar, maybe even less, and he says, but you have to defend my brother. So I said, why? What has he done? He says he's just been found guilty by the Sessions Court for theft of railway property. So I said, but you know, I'm very raw to all this. So he says, no. I have complete confidence in you, you have. So I said, all right. He said, but my brother is so sensitive that he says that if he gets even 1 day's imprisonment, he'll commit suicide. I said, oh God, but that's not the punishment for theft. You don't get that kind of sentence for theft. Nothing really would hear of it, sir. Now, obviously, with that pressure hanging on you, I went, I studied, I must have considered more than 150 authorities. And every time the matter was listed, I would go and sit in court with Justice Basme. And I would take about 40, 50 authorities with me. And he looked at this young lawyer very curiously, he'd never seen me before. And each time I would come, my pure would spread the books out, and he'd look at them. And finally, after a month, I did this for a whole month. After a month, the matter was called out. And he says, are these all your books? So I said, yes, they are. She said, well, what is it about? What is the case about? Now, I got up, I said, a client has been convicted of theft of railway property, and I am in appeal against that. Just then, my opponent gets up, the public prosecutor, clever guy, and he says, Mr. Jagtiani, he didn't argue, your lordship be acquitted because there's no evidence against you. So I looked at my books and I said, what? So the judge says, Mr. Jagtiani, you seem unhappy that you succeeded. so he comes out and then he touches my feet in front of everyone. My God. So I didn't realize I'd saved a life in this manner, but the credit should have gone to the public prosecutor. But there was another quirkier client of mine. I just much later when people had confidence in me. Now, this was a guy who comes to me, he says, you know, I'm being blackmailed. So I said, yes, what are the circumstances? And he gave me. He said they threatened that they'll have a tax raid on me, and it's a relative of mine who knows all my dealings. So I said, okay, so then. So he said, but I want to pay him the money. I said, you need to. Blackmailing and extortion is an offense in itself. Why should you do it? So he says, no, I want to do it because I want to humiliate him and make him say sorry to me that he extracted money in this manner. I had to blink a bit to see whether I was understanding correctly. And I said, and if he doesn't apologize? He says, if he doesn't apologize, I'll commit suicide. I said, oh God, what's the problem? So I said, let me get this clear. You're being blackmailed. You want to pay him for his blackmail, and then you expect him to apologize. And if he doesn't apologize, you will kill yourself. He said, yes. I said, Mr. So-and-so, where are you staying? So he says, right now, from he was out of town. He says, I've taken a room on the 5th floor of the Ambassador Hotel. So I repeated his instructions. I said, I'll tell you what you do. You move from the 5th floor to the 8th floor. So he looked at me and says, how will it help? I said, very simple. Because when he doesn't apologize after you pay him, then jumping off the 8th floor will be a surer way of committing suicide. So there's no shortage of quirkiness in this business.
I think that the postscript to that story that you told me last is at the end of this conversation, he actually asked you what your fees were.
Yes, in fact, that's another tip now you must give to all young lawyers. And if someone says he'll kill himself, if you lose, take your fees in advance. That's it. Sharon, on this note, you of course had so many of your colleagues, but then some of them have become judges thereafter. And a couple of names come to mind, like Gautam Patel and Arif Doctor and all of them, whom you used to always see as pals at the bar. You say, hi Gautam, hi Arif, etc. Suddenly, you want to change their names to say, my lord, your lordship, etc. Now, how does that happen? What do you feel when such a thing happens?
One would think that it's a difficult transition to make, but it's actually not that difficult because when you see them in a courtroom environment, in a courtroom setting, you immediately look at them differently, and automatically it's one of those unwritten and unstated things that when anyone that you may have known as a colleague or as a friend takes up judgeship, then it's unstated, but your relationship with them is put on pause for the next 12 or 15 years till they dimit office. But at the same time, you can't erase from memory what they are like as people and what their likes and dislikes are. So I think the one thing that comes to mind is when Justice Patel took up judgeship, one thing that we both knew about each other is that we had a lot of exposure to music and different types of music, and my exposure came through that. So a couple of times when I was arguing in his court, he would, in the course of arguments, disagree with me, which he did most of the time, start throwing titles of songs at me, expect me in the context of a particular matter, and expecting me to respond with titles of other songs. So literally, during a hearing in court, and this is something I could be certain that everyone else in the courtroom must have thought that we have to be certified insane because it didn't make sense to anybody who was not tuned in. So I'll give you an example. I was appearing for somebody who owed a lot of money and trying to resist the consequences of not paying. And he was, of course, coming at me, and it was quite unrelenting. And then in that moment he said, so Mr. Jagtiani, do you think that this is all money for nothing? And we all know where that title comes from. It comes from the very famous Dire Straits song. And I, of course, knew that it came from a Dire Straits song, and I knew that he was particularly fond of Dire Straits. So I looked back at him and I said, my lord, do you know what the next line of the song is? And I threatened to say it in court, and he bellowed to me saying, you dare not say it, you dare not say it, because the next line of the song is chicks for free, you know. So you do sometimes have these back and forths, and there was, again with him, and this was an even more abstract and offbeat reference to music. He took a chance, and I caught on to it. Again, mean, it's not that I appear only for people who owe money, but it just happens to be one of those other stories. And again, he spoke of, in the middle of a hearing, this was a COVID hearing, so it was done online. And again, he spoke of how, if you're not paying someone and you're defaulting, at some point the hammer comes down. And he made a reference to that famous Beatles song, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. And it's a very famous Beatles song, probably not one of the most famous, but I knew of it because of that. So he made a reference to it during the arguments, Mr. Jatiani, bang bang Maxwell's Silver Hammer. And to which, again, thanks to my exposure to music, I had to remind him that one of the macabre lyrics in that song is that Maxwell's Silver Hammer in that song ultimately goes on to kill the judge. You know? So, what I'm saying is that sometimes you can be on the same wavelength as a judge. Sometimes you will have the opportunities. And when I gave my opening remarks, I gave you some examples of how you can just diffuse a situation by something completely outside and alien to the law. So I was fortunate, again, because of your limited exposure to something like music, to be able to use it in the course of what is otherwise serious hearings. Now, coming back to you, Dad, you, again, on the subject of clients, I know that you say things, and do they take everything that you say to them seriously? I mean, or are they not able to gauge that everything is not meant to be taken at face value?
Well, let me tell you, in one case, it was taken at face value up to a point, of course. Then was that I had this client, and we used to go to Bhopal, yes, for a hearing. Now, this is a very heavy matter, and we were trying to get a city court judge to injunct a encashment of a bank guarantee issued by Paris, from Paris. Issued from Singapore. Now, it's almost impossible to injunct a bank guarantee from being cashed. But we said this has been actuated by fraud. Anyway, it just so happened we are appearing in this case, in this court, before a lady judge who probably had just come out of college and been made a judge. Young lady, so shy that she wouldn't even look up at us. And here I was there with one of my juniors, and of course Soli Cooper, our Rotarian, was with me in that matter, and another lawyer friend of mine. And the other side was again a well-established lawyer in Dubai. So we were arguing before her. Obviously everything went above her head, not simply because we were standing and she was sitting, but it just did. And at one stage we were so nervous that she would adjourn the matter because that would be all over for us. So I told her, I said, Madam, whatever you do, you decide against us or for us, but please don't adjourn the matter, because then I would have a right, I wouldn't be able to take challenges in appeal. And guess what she did? She adjourned the matter. Now, when we came back, my client was a young man in his late 20s, very good looking, tall, elegant, etc. And so myself, Soli Cooper, this other friend of mine, and we were sitting at the Jahanam Hotel, having a drink, etc. Now, after a drink, so we're not going to continue with the moping about what has happened. So, so in the course of conversation, talk about the case, what the next steps were. I suddenly looked at my client and I said, Alim was the name. I said, Alim, I think it's your fault that we got this order. He was stunned. He says, what do you mean? I said, see, you're such a good-looking person. All you had to do, this is a young judge, all you had to do was give her the benefit of your left profile. And she would have met you. So, now, how seriously, sir? So he looks at me and says, but Mr. Jatiani, I'm married. I'm not going to take that as an answer. So I said, married? How long? So he says, 4 years. I said, 4 years? That doesn't count. Your marriage won't be recognized in your own society. You have to be married for a sufficiently long time for people to realize, accept your marriage as a valid marriage. Okay. And then Soli also chips in. He says, see, I'm married for about 12 years. I said, yes, Soli is married for 12 years. That means his marriage is recognized in 12 states in India. But if he goes to Meghalaya or Assam, that's not recognized. So there is three. And I said, I've been married 25 years. So my marriage is recognized all over India, but not abroad. All the states over here. And this man is looking at us incredulously and thinking, that is it a correct theory of matrimony? Just then, my other colleague burst out laughing, and then it dawned on him that I wasn't to be taken seriously. So this is the type of yes. And now Sharon, let me ask you your turn. You've done when you were much before you became a lawyer. You've done an apprenticeship in Charles Russell in London. Yeah. I just want to know generally, what is the approach of law practices there, and especially to youngsters and juniors? That must have been unusual coming all the way from here and doing an apprenticeship with a colleague. Charles Russell, by the way, had the reputation of defending Oscar Wilde in his trial. So that's the reputation of the firm.
So I'm not going to get into the differences and similarities, that's not for today. But in keeping with the lighter side, let me tell you about an incident that centered around me. It's a rather unusual experience. I can say that very few lawyers would have been in the position that I was in. So when I was 19, my dad was collaborating with a lawyer from the UK. It was Peter George, with a law firm called Charles Russell. And Peter George used to specialize in the area of matrimonial law in the UK. And so my parents thought that it was a good idea that instead of spending a pointless vacation, that I should go to London and spend 4 weeks as an intern at Charles Russell. And so when Peter George was in India, they spoke to him, and he was of course very welcoming and very excited, because he told me that my dates in London coincided with a matrimonial trial in the UK in the Royal Courts of Justice. And he said that because of the high percentage of amicable divorces, that trials happen very, very rarely. So he said, as a law student, this is going to be a golden opportunity for you to witness a trial in the Royal Courts of Justice, because you will be Charles Russell. So the entire internship, the entire plan centered around being a witness to or being present for that trial. So as we got to the first day of that trial, and these are in-camera proceedings, where because it's personal law, members of the public are not permitted to be inside, unlike any other type of dispute where members of the public are allowed inside. So it's called in-camera. It was before a judge of the Royal Courts of Justice in London. I was 19 years old, named Justice Coleman. And the entire week was the trial. It was an American lady on her third divorce, divorcing her English husband, who was a baron of an estate, on his second divorce. And she was making a multi-million-dollar claim. So it was high stakes. So I was there waiting. And 5 minutes before the judge came to preside, the Queen's Counsel, now they know as King's Counsel on the other side, a person called Mr. Posnanski, started engaging me in conversation. And generally British, stiff upper lip, crusty, moments before a trial, even more impregnable. But he started engaging in a very pleasant conversation. Where are you from? How old are you? What are you doing over here? And I thought to myself, what a remarkable chap. He's not worried about the trial floor, and he's asking all these questions. And then after he elicited that information from me, first of all, as an intern, I shouldn't have been doing any work in the UK to start with. But he elicited that information from me, and then he turns to our side and says that this young man has told me that he is only an intern, that he lives in India. These are in-camera proceedings, and I'm going to be raising an objection before the judge, asking for him to be removed from the courtroom. And there I was absolutely petrified. Forget about removed from the courtroom, it's more likely I would be thrown out of the country. And I was all ready to leave. I had no interest whatsoever in the trial. There was a betting shop nearby. My father always thought that's more important than law. So I thought I'd make him happy. But anyways, I was on my way out. My solicitor apologized to me profusely and said, I'm extremely sorry, but we don't want to start this high-profile trial on this embarrassing note. So we'll have to leave. And just as I was about to exit the courtroom, the Queen's Counsel on our side, Bruce Blair, told me, he said, young man, you will not leave this courtroom till you're ordered to leave this courtroom. So there I was, as a 19-year-old, in the Royal Courts of Justice, detained in a court by my own counsel. And when the judge came in, believe it or not, the first application in a high-profile matrimonial trial was whether yours truly should be allowed to stay in the courtroom. And both sides made arguments on the application. They made arguments. I was sitting on the last bench over there. I could have buried a hole and just been there forever. Sitting on the last bench, hearing two Queen's Counsel arguing about whether my presence in a courtroom is legitimate or not. And our side argued that he comes from a family of lawyers. He studied law. He's doing an internship over here. And therefore there's no reason for him not to be in the courtroom. And the judge had to give an oral ruling. And I remember his words all these years later. He said, because of what you said, I treat him to be an adjunct of the firm. In which case, the only problem is why is he sitting on the last bench? He should be up front of the solicitor's bench. So that was my personal, here I wasn't a litigant, I wasn't a lawyer, I just happened to be at the wrong or the right place at the right time. So that was, I think, a very unique and unusual experience that I had in my formative years outside of India.
You know, you also did a stint with Sidney Austin Brown and Wood in America after you graduated from Georgetown, did your master's. I just want to know, what's the attitude? You know, how do they approach the law? Do they treat it as a profession like what we're meant to? Or is it for them more business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's relevant to the Indian context today, because especially amongst corporate law firms, transactional law firms, so much time that lawyers spend today is in trying to get work. You have the Rain Man idea, the Rain Man concept. It's what we call business development. Fortunately for us as counsel, we don't have to do any of that. But I'll tell you a story which I think again has a Rotary connection on this point of business development. So when I finished my master's, I got a one-year position with a very big American law firm called Sidney Austin. And I was in their international trade practice group as a foreign associate, because I have my law degree from India. And as an associate, you of course want to make your presence worthwhile. It so happened by sheer chance that one of the disputes that the firm was hoping to get engaged in involved seafood exporters from India. And believe it or not, at the center of the seafood exporters from India was none other than Uncle Gul Kripalani, who was my double agent in India to try and score this big mandate for my US law firm. I thought that if I, as a foreign associate, can bring in this work to the law firm, they're going to make me the leading partner overnight. So anyways, I had all these aspirations. I thought I would harness all of Dad's connections, and there was Uncle Gul fanning the flames from India, saying, yes, beta, I'm talking to everyone, they're going to come to you, they're going to come to you. But we always knew that being an elite firm, our charge out rates were high. There were much smaller firms who were more economical. So it was, how do you get this business? So Uncle Gul said that there is this expo of seafood exporters in Goa, and all these important seafood exporters are going to be over there. And if you really want this business, you have to chase it. So why don't you and your partner fly down to Goa, and I will arrange that your partner will address all of these seafood exporters, and then they're going to listen to him speak, and then it is a given that this business will come to your firm. So here I was trying to get business for my firm, but first telling them, like any prudent businessman, you have to expend some money. So I persuaded my partner to buy us a pair of tickets from Washington DC to fly down to Goa to address the seafood exporters, because Uncle Gul of the Rotary Club of Bombay told him that this is your passport to the deal. So we come down to Goa. My partner, who is a Yale graduate, fully prepared his speech on what is anti-dumping law, what is countervailing duties, how we're going to defend you, what the US trade authorities are going to say. So we come to Goa, he's flying with me, and we reach this expo, and I am completely aghast, because far be it of this expo being of people like Uncle Gul who were going to take this decision. The expo was nothing but coastal fisher folk from all over coastal India who would come there with samples of all the prawns and crabs that they want to serve. And so my partner is over there in this room. First of all, I could understand the word that they were saying. Most of them didn't speak English, and even if they didn't speak English, it didn't sound like English. So my partner over there is addressing this room of fisher folk, flying down over there, and he gives his presentation. And of course, to save face, I had to keep cheering him on, saying that, oh no, these are the business people, these are the decision makers. But where I was caught out was that after he finished this great 20-minute speech on countervailing duty and anti-dumping laws, all these fisher folks saw this white man in the room come from Washington DC, and they thought that he is the business development for them. So after this lecture gets over, Neil Ellis from Sydney, Austin is accosted by every fisherman from coastal India, offering their cards to him and telling them at what rates they will send prawns and crab to him. So that was really my one and only experience with the world of business and law, business development and the law. That position at Sydney got done in a year's time, and I'm back to doing what I'm doing. And now, just before I have one more question for my dad, which is that you've practiced in trial courts where the spoken language is Marathi and you're a dead loss. Everything outside of English. How do you cope with that? How do you make your submissions or cross-examine in vernacular?
Well, I forget about the vernacular, but there was an incident once. I was doing a murder case, a genuine murder case, and not a chap who threatened to commit suicide if I didn't succeed. And in the course, and this was the Judge Makijani, and the witness happened to be a Sindhi witness. So the judge says, he says, Mr. Jagtiani, what are the odds? A judge is a Sindhi, lawyer is a Sindhi, witness is a Sindhi. You will now cross-examine him in Sindhi. Now, yes, it's my mother tongue, but I can't speak Sindhi. What can I do? I mean, grew up in a convent school and all that. So I tried to hem and haw. I said, but nobody will understand. He says, I will interpret. You cross-examine him in Sindhi. So with finally, out of overcoming my embarrassment, I said, I can't speak Sindhi, but I can cross-examine him in a Sindhi accent. So that was completely shot down.
So what would a cross-examination in a Sindhi accent sound like?
Well, let me draw on my roots after all. I'm a Sindhi, but forget a cross-examination. But I think it's very simple now. It should be very easy, you see. We have a president who is a Hindi, and what great efforts he puts in. Look at the way, just seeing him gives you so much flair. It is impossible to measure his approach and act. So what are you saying? Sindhi accent comes naturally to anybody.
Thank you so much, Shailesh and Sharon. It was superb, and I can assure you there was no sunshine box today. I would now request Rotary Natasha Tejriwala to come up and give a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you to both of you. I can only offer my thanks in a Parsi accent. Thank you to both of you. I think the Jugalbandi was extremely entertaining for all of us this afternoon, Sharon. And I think that your program approach quite beautiful. So thank you both, and thank you to the audience. Thank you.
Now, today's president Satyajit please present a token of appreciation to past President Mr. Jagtiani and Sharon for a wonderful Members, please note the next meeting is on Tuesday, June 17 at the same venue. The speaker will be announced shortly. Stats for the name club members 101, Rotary partners 11, guests 6, total attendance 120.